Mark chapter 2. I love Mark. I love the Gospel of Mark. Mark would make Joe Friday happy. How many of you remember Joe Friday? Just the facts. Mark he doesn't give you a whole lot of details. He just pops it out there for you. Mark was writing to the Roman audience, and quite frankly, the Roman audience didn't care about a lot of the things that the other writers wrote about. They didn't care about Jesus' lineage. They didn't care about his heritage. They didn't care about who his great-grandfather was, those kind of things. They wanted to know that age-old question, what have you done for me lately? And so Mark tells them, this is what Christ has done lately. These are the acts of Jesus Christ. And so that's his style of writing. Probably appeals to us today because we're a lot the same way. We don't have time for facts and details. Just, give me the facts. Just tell me what's going on. And Mark does that. One of the other things that Mark does that is a blessing, is a great part of his story, is that Mark tells about the outcast. Some of you remember in Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I know we just passed Easter and away from Christmas a little ways. It's 245 days if you're counting. But in that story, in that cartoon, animated feature, whatever it's called, if you remember, there's an island there, an island of misfit toys. It's an island that is inhabited with all the toys that have flaws, all the toys that have something wrong with them and no one wants. And all they want is for somebody to love them. All they want is for a child to take them and to play with them and to take them in and to love them. I think that's part of the appeal of that little story, is most of us can identify with the island of misfit toys. We try to hide it sometimes, and we don't like for people to know it, but all of us have something that's a little bit of a misfit. If I remember correctly, on that island there was a water gun that shot jelly. Personally, I don't think that's a misfit. I can think of a lot of good uses for a water gun that shot jelly. Anything from, when Tommy acts up, or to sit down with your toast at breakfast. Oh, you need some jelly on your toast? I don't know that that's a misfit. I think there's a market for that one. We can identify with that. Like I said, we try to cover it up a lot of times, but we have, each one of us have a little bit of misfit in us. And I think that's kind of why Mark is so appealing when we begin to study his gospel, is because, again, he shows us the misfits, and that God loves even the misfits. We live in a world of everything's got to be perfect. I stopped Friday on the way back from Miss Guffey's funeral. I pulled in, there was a meal up there that had a sock outlet, and something I haven't seen much of. I used to see them around here a lot. They had the perfect ones over here, and the misfits or whatever over here, the slightly blemished, over there. You used to see that a lot, of the blemishes. And all of us have the blemishes that we try to hide. But Christ, when we look at the gospel, we find out that contrary to traditional Judaism and the Jewish way of life, Christ went and he went and found the Samaritan. He went and found the prostitute. He went and found the leper. He went and found the deaf man, as Tommy was singing about. He went and found the blind man. He went and found the mute. He went and found the crippled. And they were never the same because of that. And Mark reveals many of those stories to us of Christ finding the misfit and making a difference in their life. The number of people, when we look at those who followed Christ, there were far more misfits that followed Christ than there were the perfect religious type. Those were the ones that seemed to be attracted to the ministry of Jesus Christ. And in fact, when we read the Gospels, you may sometimes wonder, as we just came through Easter, exactly what was their problem. Why did they crucify Christ? Why did they hate Him so badly? What was their issue with Christ? And as you look at it on first thought, you may think that at some point Christ said something or Christ taught something that upset them. And I'm not saying He never taught anything that bothered the religious group, but by and large, if you read through the Gospels, you'll find out that the religious, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, their number one problem with Christ was never so much what He said, but who He said it to. They weren't so concerned about His doctrine. They weren't so concerned about His teachings, but they got upset with who He was teaching to. And we see that in this chapter as shortly after the calling of Matthew, Jesus is at dinner at Matthew's house, and the Pharisees, seeing a gathering at Matthew's house, they come by and they peek in the windows and they get upset. Why is Christ having dinner with them? Why weren't we invited? And is basically what they're saying. And so they didn't even know what He was saying. They didn't care what He was saying. The issue here is not what Christ was saying, but the issue is the audience to who He says it to. And if you read through the Gospels, you'll find out that for the most part, that was their issue, is that Christ didn't do things their way. That He didn't go to the religious board meetings. I was asked a while back about a particular group of folks that meet. And I was asked if I was going to start coming to their meeting. And I said, it depends. I said, depends on what? And I said, what are you meeting for? Are you just going to meet and talk about what somebody else done, or are you actually going to do something? And they just looked at me like I had reinvented the wheel or something. I said, because I don't need to come and talk what somebody else has done. If we're going to do something, I'll be glad to be part of it and help you pull it off. But I don't need to come and discuss what everybody else has done or might do. And so the issue here with them is, again, not what was being said, but who it was being said to. And as we look at this, and there's a lot of ways of looking at this passage. One of them is what a great encouragement, what consolation it is to you and I to know that Christ loved the misfits. As I look around this room, I see a few. There are a few. We're misfits. We've all got some flaws and some blemishes and some bumps from the road. And Christ loves the misfit. He likes water guns that shoot jelly. He likes that. He likes the misfits, and He ministers to the misfits. And what an encouragement. What a blessing to you and I to know that we don't have to be perfect for Christ to love us. But more than that, we also have the reverse of that, and that is the challenge that if Christ loved the misfits, do we? If Christ cared for the misfits, shouldn't we? Unfortunately, so much has happened over the years in religion that, much like the religion of Christ's time, it had become very introverted. It had become very self-focused. And what's in it for me? What's in it for me instead of what's in it for someone else? And as we look in this passage, I want to challenge you as we walk through these verses just to wrestle with those two thoughts for a moment, and that is this. What a blessing to know. For a moment, I'm not asking you to stand up and confess all your misfit problems, but to acknowledge I'm a misfit. To acknowledge that nothing short of the love of God, that nothing short of a verse like whosoever will, and that I'm part of the whosoever, that God loved me in spite of my flaws and my misfits. I was in a training session this week, and one of the things that the leader did, he didn't do it, but he talked about it. He takes a little 100-piece puzzle on occasion in some of his trainings, and he puts it together. And then he takes it back apart and puts various sections of the puzzle in bags. And then he'll put 4 or 5 people in a group and give them the bags and say, all right, now work the puzzle. And he says it's hilarious to watch them try to figure out how they're going to work together to get this puzzle. And he says it never fails that somewhere along the way they realize that all I've done is like if it was a big square puzzle, I've not gathered jumbled pieces. I've taken a section of the puzzle and put in each bag. And now they've dumped them all together and stirred them together and kind of trying to figure it back out. He said, but I was at one where they began to work on the puzzle and they began to try to work on the puzzle and said, I looked over and so help me, he said the guy had his pocket knife out working and whittling on my puzzle to make the piece fit where he wanted it to fit. Aren't you glad that God doesn't take out his pocket knife and whittle us down to fit? He uses us as misfits. This morning I want you to look at 3 parts of this story. And think with me on those thoughts. What about God and the misfits? The saints and the sinners at supper. The first thing you've got to notice, it sets the backdrop for everything that goes on in this passage, is we're early in the ministry of Christ, and Christ begins with the publicans calling. Jesus is moving along one day, and we learn very quickly in his ministry the position of Christ as he's moving along and he's putting together his followers. You know, one of the things that as we're in a political transition time, one of the big questions following the November elections was, what will the new president's cabinet look like? It's always a question when a new president comes in. What will his cabinet look like? Who will he surround himself with? Well, one of the questions we have to ask ourselves as Christ begins his ministry is, what's his cabinet going to look like? Well, who's he going to surround himself with? And he wastes no time. I don't know about you, and I don't have a dog in the fight. I don't know. I don't even know who it was. I just saw a headline yesterday that said the new Surgeon General is not a doctor. And I got to be honest with you, I scratched my head on that one a little bit. Seemed like that would be if you're going to be the general surgeon, you ought to somewhere, I don't know, but so what kind of cabinet is Christ going to surround himself with? And the first thing he does is a lot like calling, in my mind, a surgeon general that's not a doctor. He goes out and says the first person, or not the first, but one of the first that I'm going to call to be one of my disciples, one of my closest followers, one of my A1 students, one of my closest companions during my earthly ministry is going to be a publican. Now, I don't know what you know about publicans, because that's a word we don't use, but we're in the right season for it. That's a tax collector. Now, I don't care what society you're from or what time period you're from. That's a dirty word. There's no nice way to say tax collector. When you hear the word tax collector, you think, I'd like to have one of them water guns that shoot grape jelly. That's what we think of tax collectors. Always have, always will. But quite honestly, I've shared with you before, the Jews hated tax collectors even worse. Because of the situation. Rome had a unique idea, quite honestly, brilliant. When they conquered another nation, they didn't wipe them out. They just went in and said, all right, we own you. You belong to us. And they would move in enough Roman soldiers to kind of keep things in control, and then they would start taxing the people. And we're not going to destroy you. We're not going to wipe you out. We want you to build stuff. We want you to do stuff. We want you to make money and send it to us. Great plan. And part of that was the tax system. They would send out a list and say, okay, here are the residents of that district, and this is how much tax they owe. And they would find somebody from that district to go out and collect the taxes. And so the tax collector, how he made his money was he would look at the list, and if a person owed $100, he could charge $120. As long as Rome got their 100, he could charge more. Whatever extra he got, that was how he made his living. If he was in a good mood and he really liked Archie, he'd say, Archie, you don't owe any taxes. And he would come over here and he'd find Ryan and Dale and Debbie and Melissa, find him 5 people and just jack their taxes up by $20 to cover Archie's. And so you can imagine these were not real popular guys. Not only that, but as a general rule, they were residents of the area they were collecting tax from. Now, I don't know about you, but we just came through tax time, and no doubt many of you made your yearly contribution. God bless you. Thank you. From the rest of we appreciate that, and keep up the good work. But it's bad paying taxes. It's quite frankly, it's irritating sometimes. It's not so irritating paying taxes. What's irritating is seeing what they do with it when you give it to them. That's the irritating part. But it's bad paying taxes, but at least you're paying them to your country, and you might somehow benefit from those taxes. But to have your taxes collected and sent to another country, whew, you talk about stink from the head to the toe. And this is who Jesus calls to be one of his earliest followers. Now, I realize, and I know why the Jews would have, Matthew would have been the kind of guy that when they were walking down the street, if they would have seen Matthew coming at them, they'd have went to the other side of the street. Matthew would have just been, he wouldn't have been welcome at the class reunion. He probably wasn't even welcome at the family reunion. He probably wasn't even welcome at home. He was just, what is that, persona non grata. He was everywhere he went. I can picture him walking in a room and total strangers go, y'all smell something? He just everywhere he went. And Christ calls him as a disciple. Now, I don't know about you, but I think right off we see something about how Christ is going to conduct his business. We learn very quickly how Christ is going to conduct his next 3 years of earthly ministry, how he's going to conduct ministry, and how he expects us to conduct ministry. Christ says, this man right here, who everyone in town hates, most of his own family hates him, nobody wants anything to do with him, he's my child. He's who I'm going to call. I'm going to take him in, and I'm going to make him a follower. Do you know, I don't know, I haven't run into any of them, but there's somebody out there, there's someone that knows Martin Young. And there's someone who knows that Martin Young goes to this church. There's someone who knows that Martin Young professes to be a Christian. And there's someone that goes, I just can't believe that. I knew Martin when. Am I telling the truth? There's somebody that knows that Tommy Anderson professes Jesus Christ and goes, really? I can't, but man, let me tell you some stories about him. Listen, I want to tell you something. We learn a huge amount about who Jesus is and who he expects us to be just in this one call. When he looks at a man that was a tax collector that the world said he's no good, let's push him off. You remember, they thought the earth was flat back then. Let's take him to the edge and kick him off. That was their mindset. Let's get rid of him. He's trash. He's dirt. And he claims to be the Messiah, and he's going to hang around with that dirtbag? Absolutely not. Aren't you glad that God calls Matthews? Aren't you glad that God calls dirtbags? Aren't you glad that God uses misfits? Because I got news for you folks. If it wasn't for God using misfits, the church would shut down. If it wasn't for God using misfits, you'd be on your way to hell. If it wasn't for God loving the ones that nobody else loved and the unlovable, you'd be lost and undone without Jesus Christ. Listen, we learn very quickly the position of Christ. Christ says, there is no one beyond my reach. The Bible says he loves whosoever will, that he came and gave his blood for everyone, that all who would follow him, all who would believe in him. Listen, we have a tremendous lesson right there. Not only do we find in that passion, that statement about the position of Christ, but that tells us what our position is supposed to be. It tells us where we are. There's no one we look at and look at that person and say, oh, they're the wrong color, they're the wrong nationality, they're the wrong whatever. They can't know that. No, we don't want them in our church. We can't share the gospel with them. You say, oh, that would never happen. You living in a hole. I've shared with you before, right here in this town. No, not in this town, in this county. Right here in this county. In fact, if I was to say the name, many of you would know the name. Very notable person. Very recognizable name. Passed away now. But the church is in an area that at one time was a very upscale, very respected area. Was filled by many of the upper level management of Cannon Mills. Nice facilities. But over time, like many of our communities, the community began to shift. And now the community is largely, almost exclusively, Hispanic and African American. And the church had built a building and began to reach and began to bring those young people in and began to share the gospel with them. And this man sat on the front row of a business meeting and stands up and says, we don't want those kinds of people in our church. Don't tell me it doesn't happen. I know that just as sure as I know I'm standing here. Don't tell me it doesn't happen. But Jesus reached the tax collector. There was no one beyond the grace of God. And you better be thankful for it, and you better remember it as long as God's given you breath. We need to remember that as a church. We need to remember that as individuals. He makes very clear in his position as he begins by calling a tax collector, a publican, as his disciple. Shows us not only his position, but obviously very clearly his passion. His passion. His passion is people. Not white people. Not rich people. Not African American people or Hispanic people or Baptist people or Methodist people or Presbyterian people. Christ's passion is people. Jesus Christ died on the cross for whosoever will. Jesus didn't die for Baptists. I'm afraid I've been Baptist all my life. I guess if you cut me, I probably still bleed Sunday school green. Some of you know what that ugly color is. But I got news for you. The Baptists do not have Jesus in a museum in Nashville, Tennessee. Listen, we've got to understand the passion of Jesus Christ is people. As we were trying, I don't even remember where I was this week, we were trying to get our old songs right. We was trying to sort out between Jesus loves me and Jesus loves the little children of the world. It was a real intelligent conversation among a group of preachers, by the way. We was trying to sort it out, and we couldn't get it straight. All we could remember was this much, that song says, He loves the red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in His sight. There is no one beyond, beneath, below, or above the love of Jesus Christ. The passion of Christ is revealed to us in His position. He lays it out very clearly, but His passion, He says, you know what, there's no one that I'm going to look at. There's no one. We have become, in our world today, so in the church world, not just in Baptist, but in all denominations, but I won't speak about any of them because I don't know the rest of them. But I'm going to tell you about Baptist life. In Baptist life, we have become very proud of our organizations and our bylaws and our rules and our committees, and we have let the place burn down while people are going to hell, and we're writing more bylaws. We're writing more rules, and we're writing rules to keep people out when Christ is trying to bring people in. We're setting up barriers. We're building walls where there weren't walls when Christ is trying to bring them in. Listen, I believe with all my heart, we've got a world right now, and you may disagree with me, and that's fine. You preach next week, but that's my turn. And I believe with all my heart, we have a world right now that is hungering for the gospel. They're starving for it. They just don't know where to get it because we've cooped it up. I've shared with you before how for a long time we had those signs hanging up around here that said the church is the only organization in the world that exists for the benefit of those who are not her members. And I don't think there's one of those signs that have survived. The signs may be gone, but the truth is still there. Folks, I'm not just talking about us. I'm talking about the Church of Jesus Christ in America today. You look at our budgets, you look at our programs, you look at what we do, and 99% of what we do is internal. What can we do? You know, the question, I can tell you in 30 years of ministry, I don't even have an idea of how many times I've been asked in talking to people who were looking for a church, well, what does your church do for this group or this group or this group? And I don't believe I have ever once been asked, what does your church do to reach the lost? It's always, what do they do for the young people, the seniors? What do you do for people my age? We've become fascinated by the organization. We've become fascinated by the organization, quite frankly, while the organism is dying. Folks, the problem is not a lack of harvest. The problem is a lack of harvesters. Listen, we've got to open our eyes and see that the world around us is dying, and Jesus Christ died for people. Not people like us, not people that think like us, talk like us, same skin color. Christ died. Folks, I want to tell you something. I bust your head open. We all the same color. We all bleed the same color. And if you don't know Christ, you all go into the same place. Red and yellow, black and white. They're lost in His sight. Listen, I look around and I hear the battles and I hear the arguments and I hear the fussing in church. It's how can we keep status quo? I've shared with you before Dr. Savage's illustration of how he takes 3-4 guys, people, and stands them over here. He takes another one, puts them over there. He tells this person, I want you to get into their group. He tells this group, keep him out of your group. And then he lets the audience sit back and watch what happens. And this guy, I've watched him get up in this group here, just literally just draw up shoulder to shoulder. And I've watched the person that was trying to get in literally climb up their back and just hanging over the top, trying to get into their group and can't get in. And after a few moments of that, almost coming to a fight, a time or two I've seen him do it, trying to get in that group, trying to shove. And when it's all over, he looks at you and says, isn't it interesting that I didn't have to tell him how to keep him out? All I had to do was tell him to keep him out. Folks, we know how to keep people out. We got to learn how to let them in. I got too much time in anymore to care. Let me tell you one of the biggest battles I've had. I'm coming up here in 3 weeks. I will have been your pastor for 22 years if I don't kill you or you don't kill me. It's give or take right now. One of the biggest battles I remember going through in my 22 years was when I came here. And some of y'all can get mad at me. My phone number is in the bulletin. When I came here, y'all had a rule. We had a rule, because I was part of you, that said we only gave baby showers to people who were members of this church. Quite frankly, that was about the stupidest thing I've ever heard. If a lady's having a child and she needs help, and she needs diapers, and she needs assistance, I don't care if she's a member of this church or the Moose Lodge. If we can help her, we ought to help her. And if you don't like it, again, I'll be at the front door as soon as church is over. Too big to hide and too lazy to run. Our job is not to keep people out. Our job is to bring people in. That's why over and over the Bible describes it as a harvest. He describes it over and over as people being brought in. He shows that in this first call of calling a tax collector to be a disciple. We see not only the publicans calling, but let's look in the mirror for a moment and see the Pharisees' cowardice. See, after I get done today, I don't know if I'll make it 3 more weeks or not. Because let's just call it like it is. The Pharisees were cowards. The Pharisees, by and large, represent the church. Isn't it interesting when we look at this story and find out today, or back then they were concerned about who Christ was talking to. Today our big issues, what are we talking about? The issues are abortion, homosexuality. We're more caught up in the what than the who. We need to be worried about the who. When we get the who straight, the what will take. God's already settled the what, folks. The what's already settled. He's already said this is right, this is wrong, this is sin. The what is settled. We're debating things that God settled thousands of years ago. We're having commissions and committee meetings discussing things that God has already said, don't do that. There's no discussion to be had. The question is not what. The only question left is who. Listen, that's the big issue. Look at these Pharisees. We see their sadistic observation. Look what happens. The little worms come sneaking up to the windows, peeking in like peeping Toms. Look in there. Christ is having dinner with the lost people. Christ is having dinner with the sinners. Christ is having dinner. They look and they see all these people gathered at Matthew's house, and they say, well, we didn't get an invitation. Why weren't we invited? And then they begin to holler, well, he's got the publicans in there. Listen, I said before, something was said about homosexuality in church. Let me tell you something. Just let's go ahead and clear this up. If next Sunday there's 200 homosexuals, abortionists, whatever you want to call them, the big quote, and I'm using this, not my word, but the big sinners of the world lined up out front wanting in, I'm going to make y'all get up and give them their seats. Amen. Because we're all about getting them in, not keeping them out. And the Pharisees were all about getting the sinners away from Christ and lets us get to Him. Sounds a lot like the world today. Sounds a lot like the church. As we look at this and we see this, just like if you look in the first story in this same chapter, the religious leaders do the very same thing. They're trying to put Jesus in a box and trying to keep Him out. And again, look at the difference of what was going on here. They're upset because of who Christ was. They didn't even know what He was talking about. They were upset about who He was talking to. Listen, don't tell me we don't get upset about the who. I'm not calling names yet, but if I have to, I will. I've seen how some of us react when some of the who show up at church. Who don't dress the way you think they should or talk the way you think they should. I've seen the looks on your faces and I've heard the whispering. I can't hear good, but I heard that. Listen, the who matters. And the Pharisees were upset. They look at this and they were upset about this. Listen, the world, think about it. The world, we're worried to death today about telling the world what our position is on all these issues. You know, as somebody's rightfully said about Baptists, and I am one, folks. Am one through and through to the core. I believe with all my heart that Baptists are the closest to biblically correct of any denomination on the face of this earth. I know beyond a shadow of a doubt we're doing more to carry the gospel than any other organization. I know all the good things. I know the good things. But the problem is the world knows everything we're against and nothing we're for. You see on their sadistic observation, but I want you to notice here their sarcastic objection. Look what happens. Do a little logic with me for a moment. They're looking in the window and they see Jesus having dinner with the publicans. So, where were the Pharisees? Outside of what? The house that Jesus was in. So where was Jesus? Inside. So, roughly, how far away would you expect the Pharisees to be from Christ at this time? 15 feet? Let's say it was a big house. I don't know, how far can the human eye see? Couldn't have been that far. They couldn't have been that far. They had to be close enough to be peeking in the window and see Jesus. But notice what they do. Look real closely. When they say, as Jesus sits there, and the publicans and the sinners sat together with Jesus, they followed Him, and when they saw Him eat, they were close enough to see Him eating. They said to His disciples, how is it that He eats and drinks with the publicans and the sinners? Anybody see any problem with that statement? They say to the disciples, why is He eating with the publicans and the sinners? You see it? We just discussed it. How far are they from Christ? 15, 20 feet? And who do they ask? The disciples? Anybody see a problem with that? Get a spine. He's right there. Don't ask the disciples why He's eating with them. If you want to know why He's eating with them, be a big boy and ask Him. Makes sense to you, makes sense to me. Why in the world would they ask the disciples instead of asking Jesus? Can I submit to you my reasoning? I haven't spoken with the Pharisees or the scribes, by the way. I just know people. And I know how we operate. Let me just throw a few thoughts at you. Jesus is right over there. Tommy's sitting there looking at his Bible, and I want to know why he's reading that Bible. So I go over there and ask Archie, why you reckon Tommy's reading that Bible? Would that make any sense? If I want to know why Tommy's carrying that Bible, I go over there and ask Tommy, Tommy, why are you carrying that Bible? Why you got that Bible? They didn't do it. Why? How about this for a thought? They didn't care. They didn't care. They didn't care what he was saying. They didn't care about the people he was saying it to. What they wanted to do was plant a little bug in the disciples' ear. They didn't want the answer. They didn't care. They did want to stir up the disciples, though. They did want to stir up the disciples. They did want to get them to asking that question. If they could put a grain of doubt in the disciples' heads about why Christ was eating with the publicans and the sinners, their day's work was complete. They didn't want an answer, they didn't need an answer, but they sure was looking forward to causing trouble. This is free. Can I give you some advice, whether it's this church or whatever other church you might find yourself in someday? If somebody, as long as you're here and I'm here, if somebody asks you, why did Jimmy do that? Say, I don't know, let's go ask him. Now I'm going to tell you right up front, it's probably a really good answer, and a good chance I'm going to look at you and go, I don't even remember doing it. But anyway, somebody asks you, somebody in Tommy's class says, wonder why Tommy does that way. Well, let's go ask him. I bet they won't ask you no questions like that no more. Listen, the Pharisees, that's all they wanted to do was stir up trouble. They weren't concerned about the publicans. They wasn't concerned about the issue. They just wanted to stir up trouble. Folks, can I submit to you today that a whole lot of the things going on, a whole lot of the issues in the Church of Jesus Christ in 2017 America aren't because anybody cares one lick. They just like stirring up trouble. That's like the story that somebody said they dreamed that they got to heaven and right on the pearly gates there was a complaint box. And somebody asked Peter, said, I thought in heaven everybody was going to be happy. He said, well, some of them won't be happy unless they can complain. Listen, it's time we quit worrying about all that trivial stuff and realize people are dying and going to hell while we worried about, we wonder why they wore that to church. Did they know that didn't match? Do they know that's out of style? Don't they have nothing better? Just quite frankly, and I know they don't say this in elementary school anymore, the stupid stuff we worry about. I was doing something with the school one time, and somebody said, you can't say stupid. And I said, well, tell them don't be stupid. I won't call it stupid, They just wanted to cause trouble. They didn't care. They didn't care about the publicans. They didn't care about Christ. They just wanted to cause trouble. Folks, I know you live in a little glass tube and you don't believe me, but there's some people in the church today, they just won't cause trouble. Because that gets the attention on them. That's what the Pharisees really wanted. Look at me. And I got to tell you something. I have no reason, nothing's going on that I know of to preach this sermon. And if it is, and I don't know about it, good. That must be why I'm preaching it. You'll notice there wasn't an outline on your bulletin, and that's because I didn't settle on this message till about 9 o'clock last night. So it wasn't with anybody in mind. But if it fits you, put her on and wear her home. Because let me show you how Jesus handles things. We've seen the publican. We've seen the Pharisees. Now let's look at the physician. The very illustration Christ uses tells us everything we need to know about where Christ stands. There's a painful distinction laid out here. When Christ hears it, and by the way, in case you don't know how that works, when you go ask the disciples, Jesus heard it anyway. You may think, now everybody here I think is old enough to appreciate my illustration. Elvis sings a song. And I don't remember the exact words of it, but it says something to this effect. What you do in the night will be brought to light. Remember that. Some of you think nobody knows about your gossip and what you've said about your teacher, your deacon, or your preacher. Your preacher's just thick-skinned and don't care. You don't know what I said about you. Look what Jesus says. Jesus gives a wonderful, wonderful picture. When he hears it, he says, they that are whole, they that are well, they don't need a doctor. Only the sick need a doctor. He says to the Pharisees, I'm the doctor. And you don't consider yourself sick, so you don't need me and I don't need you. I'm here to tend to the sick. Jesus tells us a couple things in that one illustration that we need to know. He says, I'm the answer. I am the physician. In fact, the Bible calls him the great physician. Amen. And then he tells us what he thinks of mankind. They're either sick or they're sound. They're either sick or they're well. To put it in spiritual terms, they're either lost or they're found. They're either lost or they're saved. They're either close to God or they're far from God. He says there's two groups. Listen, he lays it out in that story. He says those that are sick and those that are well. He says those that are whole have no need of a physician, and those that are sick, they're the ones that need a doctor. Those are the ones I came to deal with. Folks, the best thing we can do, the thing that is so needed in the church in America today, the church in the world today, is for us to get over all of our distinctions, red, yellow, poor, rich, and realize there's two groups of people in Jesus Christ's eyes. There are the sick and there are the well. There are the lost and there are the found. When he gives the illustration, he gives the story of the lost sheep. He says a man had 100 sheep, 99 of them were found, and one of them were lost. Not 50 of them were found, and 40 of them were somewhere out there, and 10 of them were lost. He said they're either lost or they're found. When he said there's two coins, he said one of them is lost and one of them is found. There is no in between. You're either lost or you're found today. You either know Christ or you don't. There is no middle ground. There is no spiritual. There is no religious. There is no good enough, almost good enough. You either know Christ. You've either been saved by the blood. You've either been washed, set free from your sin, or you're lost and undone and on your way to hell. That's it. And until we adopt that mindset into church, we're going to keep playing these silly games, and we're going to keep adopting these silly ideas and silly rules about who can come in and who can't come in and who should and who shouldn't. We're going to keep playing that silliness. But until we come to the place where we realize they either know God and they don't. Until we start acting that way, we're going to continue to bicker over what music you know why we're arguing over what style of music to play in the church in America today? Because we forgot people are lost. You know why we're fighting over what color carpet to buy? Because we forgot hell is real. You know why we're arguing over which translation of the Bible to read? Because we forgot our children are dying lost without Jesus. I guarantee you, if we remembered our sons and daughters needed Jesus Christ, we wouldn't care if there's sawdust on the floor. It's time to put aside the pettiness and the silly games. They're either sick or they're well. They either need Jesus or they got Him. That's it. Jesus says, here's the distinction. You're arguing over sinners and publicans and this and this. And I'm telling you, there's either two groups. They're sick or they're well. They're either lost or they're found. Listen, the religious looked at people and they put them in all kinds of classes. Divided them up. Jesus says, I don't care what class you put them in. They're found or they're lost. Can I tell you something this morning? You're in one of those groups. You're either saved or you're not. You're not a church member. You're not a good person. You're not a Bible reader. You're not a Sunday school teacher. You're not a deacon. You're not a preacher. You're not a choir member. You're not a musician. You're not an usher. You're not a whatever. You're either saved or you're not. And it's time we start acting like it. That's my prayer, is that the Church of America today would realize there's two groups of people, not Democrats and Republicans, not rich, poor, lost and saved. That's his distinction. That's Christ's divide. That's his distinction, not mine. He said they're either sick or they're healthy. One of the two. How many of you go to one of those doctor's offices now? One of the popular things when you go into the doctor, you go in and they got a well waiting room and a sick waiting room. And I gotta be honest with you, I stood there a time or two and looked at that and thought, well, if I was well, I reckon I wouldn't be at the doctor to start with, wouldn't I? Shouldn't the sign be sick and sicker? Maybe three of them, sick, sicker, and sickest. My doctor did away with it. I don't know what that means. They had I never quite figured it out. They had their well waiting room part was a great big old room, and their sick waiting room was a little old closet. Now, that tells me what my doctor wants to work on. They don't want to work on the sick people. Well, now they got rid of that. They made that into another room to see well people, because they don't have a sick waiting room anymore. They turned that into a seeing room, whatever you call them. What do you call them rooms where the doctor sees you? I was thinking of a punishment or something. Whatever, exam room, whatever. Cell, prison, I don't know. Just. Mine don't have one anymore. They got, I guess we all sick or well one. I don't know. Jesus said, I'm putting you in one of two rooms. You're either sick or you're well. You see his distinction? And then he